Good afternoon and a warm welcome to one and all. My name is Prasad Patkar and I'm the editor of SMEVenture. Welcome to the second edition of the Unraveling Security series with IBM, where we focus on some thought-provoking and engaging conversations, as well as a technology showcase on pertinent cybersecurity topics. But before we start, let me just give a quick heads up for our attendees. You'll have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's subject matter expert presenter by typing your questions into the question pane of the control panel. You may send in questions at any time during the presentations. What we are going to do is we'll collect this and address them at the end of today's presentation. Last month, we had an in-depth discussion on XDR. And this month's focus is Zero Trust Security Strategy. Like I said, stolen credentials are one of the most common causes of data breaches. In a world where users, internal and external, are accessing data from anywhere, any place, and any device, how can you be sure the people accessing your valuable assets, invaluable assets and data are legitimate users? Increased digitalization and growing remote workforce have rendered the concept of the traditional perimeter-based approach to security ineffective. And that is exactly where the zero trust strategy comes into play, which is the focus of our discussion today. To discuss how zero trust security approach can help you balance user experience in security, preserve data privacy, adhere to regulatory requirements, I'm extremely delighted to have with me Mr. Tushar Haralkar, Country Technical Leader of IBM Security for India, South Asia. Tushar is based in Mumbai and has over 20 years of experience in consulting, delivery, and pre-sales experience, all in the cybersecurity domain. He is an extremely passionate Zero Trust advocate and part of the reputed Zero Trust task force at IBM Security. Tushar, a very good afternoon to you and a very warm welcome. I'd like to hand over the mandate to you, sir. Over to you.
Hey, thank you so much. Hello, everyone. I hope you all are safe and healthy. Let me just quickly share my screen. Can you see my screen, please? Can you confirm?
Yes, I can.
Great. So welcome everyone, and thanks Prasad for the introduction. So today's session we are going to focus on zero trust, and as you're aware, zero trust has many elements to it in terms of identity, data, endpoint, network, applications, and each of these elements are huge in terms of the use cases that needs to be covered and the importance of it in the zero trust journey. So today we are going to focus on one of the elements, which is identity, and we'll see the significance of identity in the zero trust journey. So when I say identity, it could be your internal users like your employees, contractors, partners, and external could be all type of your consumers, right? So we'll see, and identity could also mean your privileged users, all kind of identities we are referring here. So we'll see what is the significance of identity in the overall zero trust journey. So with that, let me set the context first. As part of digital adoption, we have seen that especially in the last 2 years, there is a significant increase in the digital adoption, primarily because of the pandemic that we had, and it has really changed the way business operates. Now we see different kind of users like employees, contractors, partners, customers coming from any device, trying to access from anywhere, and applications are moving to cloud. Data is exponentially growing. From an infrastructure standpoint, servers, networks are spread. So everything is basically spread across on-premise, cloud, and multiple cloud, so it's across hybrid cloud. And in summary, now data just doesn't reside inside the network, right? It is everywhere, and we are living in a perimeterless world, right? And there are no more few remote workers right now. Every one of us are working remotely, right? So all of this complexity is why we are seeing organizations turning to zero trust. Now, we all know that zero trust is not a product. Okay, it's a overall security strategy based on three core principles. One is never trust, always verify, which means you need to do continuous verification or continuous authentication. Second is enable least privilege, which means that you need to make sure that only minimal privileges are given to perform the respective job duties. And the classic example could be that if your endpoint has certain applications, then you make sure that only whitelisted application has got access to the data. No third-party process should have access to the data. So in case of, let's say, a ransomware attack, which is a third-party process, will not have access to that data. So that is enabling least privilege is important. And last but not the least, we all know that there is no 100% security, right? But we need to design the security controls in such a way that we should assume that the breach has happened, which means that even if the attacker is inside the network, we need to have certain controls like micro segmentation, so that the attacker does not do a lateral movement. He does not move from one network to other, so on and so forth, right? So the question is really, the question is not really whether it will happen or not. The question is when it will happen, are we ready for it, right? So these three are the core principles of zero trust. Now, when we talk about the overall spectrum of trust, primarily you see two models. One is implicit trust and the other is zero trust. Now, when we say implicit trust, we are talking here about, let's say, an employee who is accessing applications sitting inside the office. So he's obviously a trusted employee. So obviously there is an implicit trust, which means that it will trust everything and verify nothing, right? And zero trust is exactly opposite, right? It is all about trust nothing and verify everything. So even if that employee is sitting inside the office and trying to access application, you may still want to look at it holistically in terms of that, okay, his identity looks good, but is he coming from the right device? All of those aspects that you need to look at, and we'll see that in the later slides. But what we want to basically highlight here is that you are today maybe in an implicit trust, but you need to eventually move to zero trust through analysis, right? To analyzing the risk of your data and then taking an action in terms of what you need to do with that data, depending on the sensitivity of that data, right? So that journey of moving from implicit to zero trust is something which is very important, and we'll see what it takes to go, what it takes to reach there, right? So when we say zero trust, context is very, very important, right? So if I have to tell you that one of the objectives of zero trust is to make sure that you enable the right user under the right condition to have the right access to the right data. I'm sure all of you will agree to this. Because nobody would want a wrong user for no reason having access to the right data, right? So we all know that this is something which everyone would agree. So this is something which is very important. The context is very important when we talk about the overall zero trust. Now, what does zero trust success look like in practical? So if you see, the first, as I said, you need to look at the context. You need to define the context, right? So first aspect is the user, which is the identity. So who is that user? Is he allowed to do that? Or all of those, where from which location is he coming from? All of those aspects in terms of is the two-factor authentication that he's provided, like SMS OTP or email OTP, is it correct? So all of that context is very, very important when we look at the user, right? Then when we look at the data, now data is everything, right? Everybody is behind the data, a hacker or a genuine employee or a genuine legitimate user, right? Everybody is behind the data. And when I say data, it can be all type of data, personal, financial, demographic, all kind of data. So the first step is to have visibility into where all your sensitive data is lying, right? Once you have that visibility, then you start monitoring that data, and any suspicious activity that you find uh, accessing that sensitive data, you would want to be informed, right? And so that you can take some action on it, right? So one is the visibility, and the second is, if the data is compromised, we keep on hearing the data breaches, right? If the data is compromised due to a malware attack or a ransomware attack, you need to make sure that the data is encrypted, so that even if the data is compromised, because it is encrypted, it is of no use to the hacker, right? Then comes the applications. Now, to get to the applications, you're going to have the source as one of the source as applications. So application also needs to be secured, right? And then the other source through which you're going to access the data is obviously the endpoint. So when I say endpoint, these are the different kind of devices through which you will access the data. So that also needs to be secure. So even if, let's say, my identity is genuine, like my username, password, or OTP is genuine, but my device is compromised, okay, my device is at risk, where my device has a malware, or my device is jailbroken, or my device is connected to unsecure Wi-Fi, or any specific risk which is there on my device, even if my username, password is correct, or OTP is correct, or even if my application is secured, it is of no use, because the entire data is at stake, right? Because the source through which you're going to access that data, um, which is endpoint, is already compromised. So endpoint also becomes very important. And last but not the least, the network. Now this is a very huge area. Now I've seen a lot of organizations starting with ZTNA, zero trust network access. So they focus, so they start their zero trust journey from network, right? While that is good, and while that is good, but network is not the only element that we need to look at, because what we are seeing now is that, apart from network, now identity is really becoming the new perimeter, right? Because no matter how strong the network is, if the identity itself is compromised, then the data is at stake, right? So for the organizations who have already started their journey, maybe with zero trust network access, would also recommend you to look at the other elements of zero trust, in which identity is one of the critical element, right? And of course the data, right? Because everything is for data, right? Everyone is behind that data. So these two are the very critical elements. um, and then once you look at the entire context for each of these elements, you basically verify and then enforce it. And then once you enforce it, you basically do the analysis and then resolve those incidents, right? And this requires continuous improvement, right? This requires continuous improvement in terms of looking at it holistically for each of these elements. Now, when we look at the industry, zero trust has been there for more than a decade, and we know that Forrester has laid down a framework where, if you see, data is at the center, and what you see is around it is the sources through which the data is going to get access. And we spoke about it, right? We spoke about the user, we spoke about the device, we spoke about the network, and also the workloads, which is nothing but application. We at IBM basically follow the Gartner Carta framework, which is continuously adaptive risk and threat assessment, and align it with NIST, which is very, very important. So we need to align that framework with the framework that NIST has laid down, right? So we basically work with you to align your zero trust adoption as per this framework. Okay. Now, when we look at the adoption, right, for different customers, and when we look at the report, which is shared by Ponemon Institute, which is a cost of data breach report. If you see, for the customers who have not started this journey at all, the cost of data breach is very high, right? And the customers who have released at a very good maturity level, the cost of data breach is low. So it all depends on how you are going to start that journey of zero trust. The earlier you start, lesser the impact in terms of the overall cost, reputational loss, and all of those challenges that you would have, right? So this is a quick view of what is the impact, and where we see depending on the different journey that the customer is in terms of zero trust, what is the impact in terms of the cost. Now, we keep on hearing this also, right? Compromised credentials, username, password. So username, password is basically lying in dark web, deep web, and a lot of PII data like credit card information is just lying on dark web, deep web, and up for sale, right? We keep on hearing these data breaches regularly. Now, so when we say, oh, my username password is compromised, but I have a two-factor authentication. But then the question is two-factor authentication good enough? Maybe not, because now two-factor authentication is also getting compromised. Because let's say if I have a SMS, if I have a suspicious SMS listener on my mobile, it can also steal my OTP, right? So username password was already compromised. It's already lying in dark web, and the OTP. Because if I need to do a banking transaction, the fraudster would need an OTP, and he can easily spoof my device, and using SMS listener, he can basically steal my OTP as well. So two-factor authentications are also getting compromised. The device can also be spoofed. So one of the other factors that I have seen organizations looking at is, okay, if the username password is correct, SMS OTP or email OTP is correct, and if he's coming from a registered device, all good. So we saw that username passwords are getting compromised, two-factor authentication, SMS, email, OTP is getting compromised. Device can also be spoofed. So let's say if I have a malware on my device, I can take a remote access of a registered device. And what the organization will look at, that he's coming from a registered device, and identity and everything looks good, so allow the access, right? So device spoofing is also something which through which the attacker can get into the network. And then there are other methods through which the hacker can get into the network, like SIM swaps and so on and so forth. Now when we talk about specifically on multi-factor authentication, we are also seeing that especially on the retail side of it, where consumers have given up the online purchase because of not a very good experience in terms of the two-factor authentication coming up every time, right? So how do we give them a frictionless experience where maybe scan a QR code using a mobile and try to log in, or maybe avoid SMS OTP. Instead of SMS OTP, if some kind of a push notification can come on my app where I can do a fingerprint approval or biometric authentication, then it becomes easy, because I have an app and I can basically just use that app to do a fingerprint or a biometric authentication, and then the transaction is done. Because we all know the challenges with SMS or email OTP. Sometimes it doesn't come, right? And it's not a very good experience in terms of asking that for each and every transaction that I would do. So what we are seeing is that customers are also looking for a frictionless experience, something like scan the QR code, log in, which is basically without any password, but behind the scenes you're actually coming from a registered device. It will check all the aspects, not just the device but all the aspects, and allow you to log in, right? While from a customer perspective it looks frictionless, but behind the scenes there are a lot of checks, right? And same is with the approval also. You get a notification, you approve it, and done, right? Now all of this basically means that we are moving towards adaptive access. So is adaptive access the solution? Maybe yes, but then what's the catch, right? So we see a lot of people are interested in adaptive access, but the survey says that only few people have implemented it, and the other 58% says that identifying users with malicious intent are the hardest part, right? Because in the digital world it is really difficult to know if it's really the genuine user, or is he really a fraudster or a bot. Because in a digital world we are going to check the digital identity, right? We really don't know who is behind the keyboard. So that is where IBM comes up with a solution. IBM has a solution to solve these challenges, known as IBM Security Verify. So it's one solution which is in line with the zero trust, especially on the identity side of it. So what it basically looks at is not only the authentication part, which is the username, password, or two-factor authentication, but it goes beyond that and also looks at what is the risk on the device, right? And there is a laundry list of risk that it detects on the device. It could be a malware, it could be jailbroken rooted, it could be device connected to unsecure Wi-Fi, and there is laundry list of risk that it will detect behind the scenes on the device, right? Then it will also look at the network, right? If you're, let's say if you're connected to some unsecure Wi-Fi, right? Because if you're connected to some unsecure Wi-Fi, there are chances that there could be a man in the middle attack. Then it also looks at behavioral biometric, which means the way I type my password, the way I move from one key to another, the time that I take to move from one key to another, the way I move the mouse, so on and so forth. Basically, what if I tell you that without an OTP, I can detect you just with the username password, that is this Tushar, or is this bot, or is this somebody else? And I will show you a live demo of this as well, in terms of how this capability works. But this is something which is powered by AI ML, and just by the way I type my username password, the system detects that is it really me or somebody else. So that's one. And then we also have a consortium data. So we have customers locally, globally, and we have a consortium data of all the good and bad attributes that we tag. And we also have the fraud patterns, right? We all know fraud is getting sophisticated day by day. So we basically have those fraud patterns, and we identify if there is any new pattern which has come. We identify those patterns, the suspicious or anomaly activities. And also we look at the when I say behavioral, we also look at the user activity, right? For example, let's say I'm doing a transaction of maybe 5,000 daily, but suddenly I do a transaction of maybe 1 lakh, or maybe suddenly I'm trying to do a transaction in midnight, right? Or maybe IP velocity checks, right? I've done a transaction from India, and suddenly after 2 hours there is a transaction from US. So obviously I can't travel to US in 2 hours, right? Which means there is some anomaly. IP velocity checks is a challenge. So all of that is something which the solution looks at, and then depending on the risk, the organization can then take a call whether to allow that transaction, or whether to deny that, or whether to do a step up, right? So these insights help the organization to take that decision, right? And this is all behind the scenes. So as a customer, it will be BAU, but behind the scenes as an organization, you get to see all of these insights, right? And I will show this live in terms of how basically these insights look like, right? So let me go to a live demo where I will actually demonstrate this. So this is a demo that I'm going to show you live for one of the fictitious organization, which is Trust Me Bank. Okay, and here this is my password. Okay, you can see my password. Okay, now you see I've logged in. I can see what I'm supposed to do in this transfer money or all of that activity. And if you see this blue icon, right, now this is something which is behind the scenes, what the organization will see. So if you see, what we look at is from a device perspective, it shows, hey, the device looks clean, there is no infection, it is not spoofed, right? There is no IP velocity patterns that is found. Everything looks good. From a session perspective also, it is clean, location is fine, IP address, it's not a bot, it's not a phishing. And from an identity perspective, it says the probability of true user is high, right? And behavioral pattern, everything matches, right? Everything matches, basically it's all normal, right? You can see all green, right? All good, and the risk score is also good, right? So since the risk score is all good, it says allow login. Okay, now we looked at a challenge. We spoke about a challenge of compromised credential, right? Now if I basically, now typically a fraudster, right, what he will do, the same username password which I just typed, right? What he will do, he will just maybe copy paste. Now obviously when I do a copy paste, the pattern changes, right? So I do a copy paste here, right? The password is the same. Oh, sorry, let me just type the password. I didn't copy it. So this is my password. Okay, now let's see what happens. See, now the password, username and password is the same. The application is also the same, but still I am not able to log in now. I can see some error, right? But in the back end, if you see what has happened, is it says that there is a behavioral anomaly and the risk score has also significantly increased. And because the risk score has significantly increased, the recommendation is denied, right? So if you see, while the device was clean, the session was also clean, but the identity, from identity perspective, it was a risk because the probability of true user is low, right? Because it was a different pattern. Now the obvious question here would be that every time, even I as a genuine user may do a copy paste, right? May not type the password, which is right. But in that case, what we do is we also check the other parameters like session or device, and then basically depending on the risk score, it is flexible, so you can define that that copy paste or something which is there, but then other aspects also needs to be looked at, because if there is a copy paste but the device is infected, and the session is also at risk, then definitely you do not want this user to log in, right? Or maybe do some transaction. So we do not just rely on one parameter. We also look at the other parameters like session and device, right? So that is the aspect, right? And it could be a possibility, not even copy paste. It could be other possibility that every time I may not type with the same speed. True, right? Again, the same logic applies, right? We don't just look at identity risk, we also look at session and device. And this is something which you as an organization can control in terms of what is the policy that you need to define, and then accordingly the risk score will be defined and the recommendation will be provided, right? Because all of this is going to drive the user experience, right? And that is the reason these are the insights that I wanted to show you. Now when we talk about the other challenges that I spoke about, which is continuous verification, let's look at the demo of that as well, right? Now this is again I'm going to Trust Me Bank. Okay, so now if you see I've logged in, it's all good. Okay, let me show you. It's all good from a device. It's coming from an unmatched browser, that's fine. The session, maybe I'm traveling to a different location, that's okay, that risk is okay. So a risk is below the threshold. So the recommendation is maybe to authenticate, maybe do a step up if you want to, right? If it's let's say today I'm in Mumbai, tomorrow I'm in Delhi, and you want to make sure that if the location is changed, do a step up, you can do that as well, right? But the identity looks clean, the session is basically just a location has changed and everything looks good. Now now when I'm clicking on transfer money, right, obviously I will to secure it, I will get a multi-factor. In this case it is fingerprint, right? So if I do a touch ID, basically I get that page. Now what you see interestingly is, now this is giving red. Now if you see what it is, you will see that there was a suspicious transaction from a malware infected device. Now there are certain malwares which are inactive when the user logs in. They become active when you are trying to do the transaction and take the money out, right? They become active at that point in time. So our solution basically does a continuous verification, which means the username password is correct, he has logged in, everything looks good. The malware is still on the device, but he's not active. The moment it becomes active, when he's doing the transfer money, we have detected that, which means that we basically also look at continuous verification. We look at the device risk, we look at the session risk. We looked at the session, we found out that the session was infected with malicious injection, and of course the malware was also there. And we see that the from identity perspective also there is a risk. And since it is a very risky transaction, the recommendation is to deny, right? So if I go ahead, so as a customer, right, I don't know what's happening behind the scenes, but when I try to do this transaction, I will not be allowed to, because by the time the organization has got this risk insights, they have in real time taken an action that that money is not gone out of the bank and his money is protected, right? So this is the continuous validation or verification or authentication that the solution does, despite the user has logged in, everything looks good at that point in time, but when the customer is actually transferring the money, the malware becomes active and then we detect it, right? So this is again a classic example of zero trust, how we are able to really do that continuous verification, which is never trust, always verify, right? Now the other use case is obviously phishing, right? We all know phishing is very common, right? Now let me just show you the use case of phishing. Okay, now in phishing, what happens is typically the hacker will have credentials, let's say from dark web, deep web, and let's say of Trust Me Bank, right? He will basically just copy paste this credentials, okay, and try to log in. Now, as part of phishing, your credentials are compromised. Now, behind the scenes, what has happened, the organization already got these insights, right? That this credential was compromised due to phishing. Okay. Now, when the hacker basically tries to log in with this compromised credentials, okay. Sorry, let me go back to this. So now when the hacker tries to log in, 1 second. Okay. So I will just use this and put it in a document so that we will see. Now this is compromised due to a phishing attack, right? Now I'll just use this. Now this is again a compromised example, right? Now the hacker basically tries to log in with this compromised credentials, and this credential was compromised due to phishing attack, right? Now let me just try to see what happens, right? As a hacker, when I try to copy paste this, let's see what happens. Giving the password, right? So see, I'm not able to log in despite the fact that the username password is correct. It's not allowed to log in, right? So what has happened behind the scenes is we have seen that a suspicious access followed by a phishing event, right? So we have seen all of these checks. We have seen the device was at risk. It was an untrusted device because the hacker came from his device, which probably was not trusted or registered device. His location was not matching. We have detected it's a phishing attack, and the identity was also at risk, right? So this insights has helped the organization to prevent this fraud rather than doing a forensics at a later stage, right? So and there are many such use cases that we detect using IBM Security Verify solution, giving you insights holistically, not just the username, password, or OTP, or the other capabilities like single sign-on, but importantly, giving you that risk insights so that you can move your journey from implicit trust to zero trust, right? Now, going back to the other use cases, that we see in zero trust, when we talk to a lot of customers, there are many use cases or many challenges that organizations would have. Now, if you look at the top priorities that the customer has, is number one, data privacy. We know how important this is. GDPR, right? We know that on the similar lines, there is a data protection bill, which is the India privacy law, which is going to be so on the similar lines of GDPR, and there are huge fines, like 15 crores fines, which is associated for non-compliance of data, right? So data privacy becomes very, very important. How do you make sure that your data is secure? Because we keep on hearing there's a lot of data compromises and data breaches. So the first thing that we see organizations asking for is, I want to have visibility into where is my sensitive data. Okay, once I have that visibility, where is my sensitive data lying, then I basically start monitoring that and then start blocking that depending on the risk, so on and so forth. And then I also want to make sure that my data is encrypted at rest and in motion. Okay. So that even if, let's say, despite having all the controls, my data is compromised, it is of no use to the hacker because the encryption key is securely stored with me, right? So encryption, monitoring, all of these use cases are very, very relevant when we talk about the data privacy aspect use case. The second use case is we spoke about the applications, the data, the identity, moving to cloud, right? So basically, there are still some legacy applications which will still be on premise, and then there will be modern applications which will move to cloud, and there will be multiple cloud providers that our organization may have, right? So the biggest concern here is, how do I have a uniform security policy across the hybrid cloud, right? How do I enforce that uniform security across my hybrid cloud and have that single abstraction layer where I can control centralized authentication, authorization, right? Adaptive access, all of those things I would want to control it at the abstraction layer rather than going to the application every time and doing the changes, right? I would want to have a centralized view of controlling my applications, my data, my identity, and all of that, right? So that's the second use case that organizations are looking forward to. And the third is, of course, the hybrid workforce. So we all know we are working hybrid now, right? Not all of us are in office, right? And so how do we make sure that if a person is working remotely, his identity is not at risk, his device is not at risk, because now he's no more coming through only corporate device. He could also come through his own device, right, which could be unmanaged device. So how do we make sure that even if he comes from the unmanaged device, as an organization you have got visibility into what is the kind of risk they have, right? And typically, as part of this hybrid workforce, we see, one of the important initiatives that organizations started taking 2 years back when the pandemic struck us was business continuity planning, right? That was the topmost priority, because we were not ready for it, right? We never expected that so many people will work remotely. So business continuity planning for people who are working remotely started, and that's where VPN was one of the prime use case where giving VPN to remote workers was the solution. But is that enough? Maybe not, because uh, through VPN you're trying to gain access to the corporate data. Now, what if the device from which they're trying to access the VPN is compromised? You know, the hacker can easily get into the network through that. So just having VPN for hybrid workforce is definitely not enough, right? So you need to add on the controls like getting visibility into the identity risk, the device risk, the application, the network, and all of that, right? When we talk about the hybrid workforce, because now your data is exposed outside, so it becomes very, very important. This is one of the most important use case that we see organizations asking for. And last but not the least, this will continue. The risk of insider threats will continue, because the thing is, these are all trusted users, right? These are all legitimate users having a legitimate access to the applications and data. Now, the biggest challenge organizations are facing is, since these are legitimate users or trusted users, how do I get visibility into something which could be an anomaly? Right? For example, an employee who is a legitimate employee, but he's serving his notice period, and he could be, exfiltrating a lot of data from the network. Suddenly he's exfiltrating a lot of data into the network. Or maybe a privileged user who is trying to log in some odd times, right? Or maybe a DBA who is logging into the database and trying to modify certain sensitive customer tables, or he's trying to exfiltrate a lot of data. And he's a genuine user or a privileged user, right? So how do you basically reduce that risk of insider threat? How do you detect such anomalies? Because we have seen that most of the attacks today, almost 60% of the attacks today are seen as part of the insider threats. And this is again a very, very important use case where organizations are looking for visibility, visibility across endpoint, across cloud, across applications, across identity. What's the risk? So that proactively they can take an action rather than rather than something happening and they're doing the forensics after that. So these are the four main use cases that we see in terms of the priorities that organizations are going for as part of zero trust adoption. Now, if I have to just summarize, if you have to begin the zero trust journey, some of the things, I'll just quickly summarize what we discussed is zero trust is not a product, but definitely you need the tools that can help, right? You need tools like identity, you need tools like data security, you need tools like application security, network security, all of those. So definitely you will need tools to reach there, right? But the point is you need to think holistically, right? As I said, a lot of organizations are starting this journey with network security, which is good and important, but maybe not sufficient, because as I said, identity is becoming the new perimeter, right? So you need to look at securing the identity itself, and definitely slowly and gradually look at other things. But the biggest $1 million question is where you should start. Right now it all depends on where you are now, and that's precisely and then that's precisely the context where we come in and help you to basically assess your environment, okay, and basically understand your current security investments, understand your current security landscape, right? and and basically give you that risk, right? That these are the gaps, okay, these are the gaps, this and when we say these are the gaps, with that gaps, these are the risk, right? Do you want to accept that risk, or do you want to ignore that risk, or do you want to mitigate that risk? Is totally up to the management, right? But we give you that visibility that, hey, we know your environment, this is your overall landscape, these are the gaps, and this is the risk. So this complete view is something which we give you, and we also help you in prioritizing what are the initiatives that you would want to take as an organization depending on the risk, right? And then you can then take it up to your management that these are the initiatives that has come up as part of this zero trust workshop that we offer, and this is completely free of cost. We do not charge anything for doing this workshop, and you can touch base with Kunal Sham. The email ID is mentioned here. So soon there will be a poll question which will come, where we will basically want to understand if you are interested in for giving us this opportunity to do this workshop. We definitely will talk to you and give you that visibility. We have been doing this for a lot of our customers, and especially I would say for the organizations who would want to understand what are the things that they need to prioritize for this financial year, right? Because there are so many things to do. This workshop definitely helps them to do that, because with this they really understand where are the gaps and what are the risks, and can they really ignore that risk or mitigate that risk is totally dependent on the cost of that risk, right? So all of that visibility is something which we provide, which helps you to get that sort of a business proposal to your management to implement that um, particular particular area like identity, right? If you start with identity, right, what are the things that you need to do? So let's say you have some solution around a network, but you do not have anything on identity. So we help you identify that and give you that view that it will not be anything which will be maybe product specific, but we help you to gain that. We bring in our professional services to give you that neutral view, right? That they bring in the best of the class solutions today that are available in the market, and tell you that for this specific security control, this is the best solution that is offered, maybe IBM or non-IBM, right? And the idea here is, again, to clarify, the idea here is not to rip and replace your existing investments. Our objective of this is to see how we can leverage your existing security investments and only look at those areas where there are gaps, where there are risks, and then help you to identify the priorities, the business priorities that will help your organization to grow exponentially, right? So that is what we had, as a call to action, and this is what I wanted to cover. I hope this session was useful. So I'm okay to take up the questions now.
Tushar, before picking up the questions, first of all, thank you for the presentation. I mean, we had demos, we had use cases, we had real life examples. Like I promised at the beginning of the webinar that the session would be engaging. We have 10 minutes left with us, so let's do a little bit of engagement. We have 3 polls that we're going to do now. I would request the attendees to select the appropriate answer and press submit. I'll give the attendees 40 seconds to answer the poll. So think and answer. We will flash the results once the poll is finished. Here's our first poll question. What are your biggest concerns around protecting your users inside and outside your organization? Please select the appropriate option and click submit. We'll have 30 to 45 seconds to flash the polls results. What are your biggest concerns around protecting your users inside and outside your organization? Balance user experience and security, preserve data privacy, adhere to regulatory requirements. Request the attendees to submit their answers. Can we please flash the results? Okay.
Balance user experience and security is the highest, and absolutely, absolutely spot on, because the biggest concern today is too much of security should not hamper the user experience, and that's precisely what we are seeing. As a very important use case, because today, if we need to grow the business exponentially, onboard more and more customers online, then we need to have that frictionless experience. And one of the things that I did mention is that 40% of the consumers are really not going through the entire journey because of that experience around that they had with too much of two-factor authentication. So definitely this concern is something which we can address using our passwordless authentication and the various use cases that I spoke about. Like one of the examples, I can just, while we are on this, just quickly, I can just show you, since we have some time, I can just quickly show you how the, hope my screen is visible, right?
Yes, Tushar, go ahead.
I'll just quickly showcase a demo, how the, when we talk about this, how frictionless experience really looks like, right? So what I'm doing on this is, I'm just scanning the QR code, okay, with my registered device. I have already registered my device securely, and now what has happened is behind the scenes, it has basically checked if it's a registered device, if it's coming from the right location, and all of that. A lot of parameters that it basically checks as part of the overall zero trust model, and then basically it allows me to sign into this, right? And within IBM, something went wrong. 1 second. Let me just try again. Yeah, done. So you see, there was no password. There was no password that I put. So within IBM, we basically have implemented this for all the employees, where you can log in without a password using your device, registered device, scan the QR code, and that's it. You're logged in, and then you can do single sign-on to your applications, right? So this is a classic example of how you can balance the user experience and security. While security is there, it's invisible, but from a customer perspective, it's a very good frictionless experience, and that's how you balance it with security. So yeah, you can pose the next question.
Thanks, Tushar. Can we have the second poll, please? Are you considering protecting your users with zero trust security strategy? Please select your options. Yes, no. We'll have 30 seconds with you. Are you considering protecting your users with zero trust security strategy? May I request the attendees to please select the appropriate option and press submit. Okay, can we have the results, please?
Oh, wow, great. Great.
Okay, can we just move on to the third poll question? Would you be interested in taking the zero trust workshop for no charge? I would request the audience to press the correct option and press submit. This is something which is happening at the back end. We would like to take this in the Q&A session as well. Would you be interested in taking the zero trust workshop for no charge? We won't be flashing the results for this. So I'll just give you 20 seconds to answer. Okay. Can we please close this? Tushar, we had this third poll question. Could you please just elaborate on what do we actually do at the zero trust workshop? I mean, how much time does it take?
Okay. So this is generally a 3-hour workshop. We do not take much time. So we engage with the key stakeholders within your organization, like the information security team, the application team, your line of business. So all of those key stakeholders, basically we come onto a call. Now, in case where everything has started, we can also have in-person meeting, and then basically we have certain discovery questionnaires, right, where we ask you to understand what is your existing security landscape, and then we basically go deep in terms of understanding. Once we understand your security landscape, your investments around security, we identify the gaps, we highlight the risk, and then give you a report, right, which gives you the holistic view of what are the initiatives or what are the things that you would want to take it up to your management, for zero trust adoption. So so the outcome of this is going to be, one, how we can leverage your existing investments, and how we can mitigate the gaps or the risks that are there. And the third outcome is basically the priorities that you can take it up with your management for implementing zero trust. So there will be a proper detailed report which we share as an outcome of this workshop, and it hardly takes 3 hours, 3 hours discussion. Okay.
Thank you.
So this is, yeah.
Yeah, so we have a question from our audience. We had it at the beginning of the session. Mr. Ashish Yadav had a question. What kind of cyber kill chain you suggest at the time of cybersecurity incident? Would you like to take this up? What type of cyber kill chain you suggest at the time of cybersecurity incident?
So if you look at the typical cyber kill chain, right, we start with reconnaissance, and then once the reconnaissance happens, and slowly and gradually, let's say in case of a ransomware attack, right, once the reconnaissance happens, and then the attacker actually gets into the network through, let's say, a malware, or maybe if you look at the cyber kill chain, right, typically, let's take a simple example of a user clicking on a link, right? That link could be a phishing link, or it could be a link which downloads some malicious malware on the device. Now, once the malware is, let's say, downloaded on the device, the kill chain starts, right? Where let's say on the device where he has clicked that link, if you have some kind of a EDR solution, right? Like IBM has a solution called Reacta, which will help you to identify that malicious content like malware. Okay, but what has happened is since it has traversed over the network, we also need to look at, while on the endpoint we have a EDR solution which is IBM's Reacta, we have mitigated that as part of the kill chain, but on the network, if that has done a lateral movement, then on the network side also we need to look at it, what is the impact, right? So we have something called IBM QRadar network detection and response, right? So which also helps you to detect the anomalies at the network level. For example, as part of if somebody has actually clicked on that link, and if the attacker is trying to exfiltrate the data out of the network, suddenly a lot of data is trying to get exfiltrated out of the network, then it will get detected at that level. And the third is basically a SIM solution, right? Again, IBM has a solution like QRadar SIM, which will correlate the data from EDR or a network and different log sources, and give you that correlated view that this is the incident. And then once that incident is confirmed that yes, it is at risk, then basically it will go to something called like a SOAR platform, which is the incident response platform. And there you can have automation and orchestration, where you'll have basically the workflows through which you can go and let's say you want to block that suspicious IP, or you want to block that user. All of that action can be taken from there, and finally the forensics can happen. So as part of the cyber kill chain, if you see this entire cycle, you need to have controls at each of those areas to determine the fraud, and then and help you to mitigate that fraud.
Thank you, Tushar. I think we have, yeah. Tushar, yes, Tushar?
Go ahead. No, go ahead. I was just about to say go ahead.
Okay. Yes. I think we have a couple more questions, but we are running short of time. So I would urge you, along with the IBM team, to take those questions at the back end. If I had to give a rundown of what the session was all about, I think in most common law systems, what happens is we have this approach of innocent until proven guilty. But what I understand is zero trust security is guilty until proven innocent approach to network security. Thank you, Tushar, for breaking it down so brilliantly for our attendees, and thank you everyone for attending today's webinar. Once you leave today's webinar, you will receive a survey on the presentation, and we would appreciate if you could really complete that and provide your feedback. You will also receive a follow-up email within 24 to 48 hours. From our side, on behalf of SMEVenture, on behalf of IBM, and our presenter, Mr. Tushar Haralkar, thank you for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.